Coming up, as the Brooklyn Nets continue to find their rhythm on the court, one of the biggest questions for this franchise is, should Cam Thomas be in the starting lineup? An electric scorer who could certainly help this team get more wins as they continue their playoff push.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armour, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. And tomorrow, Tuesday at high noon, you can check out the Devils Puck Luck podcast, breaking down your New Jersey Devils as well. We thank you for making us your first listen. We're free on all those great platforms, friends. And Doug, the great debate continues. You thought when the trades went down and the stars were gone, it'd just be smooth sailing through the rest of this season. But no, there's still plenty to discuss, especially around one Cam Thomas.
Yeah, look, coming off a brutal loss against the Hawks, could have gone either way. Anytime there's a buzzer beater, that be the case, right? It's kind of just as close as a game can be. And yet we're still probably sitting with not too many games left, about less than a quarter of the season remaining, sort of like at a crossroads. I think about where this team is headed just in terms of direction. And I think really that's completely, to me, and I think to you as well, completely embodied in like what is happening with Cam Thomas, really kind of so this whole season. I think we'll talk about whether or not we think Cam should be starting here, but also, as you'll see, I think as we go through this, it's sort of like a microcosm for like where the team is just in general, right?
Yeah.
Like what their motivations are going forward. I think you and I kind of maybe even disagree about the Cam thing, but it's also just kind of speaks to like sort of what is happening with this team. What is the trajectory of this team? What are their goals? Like that, I think that's the thing that seems a little confusing right now. And in some ways it is sort of embodied with what happens with Cam Thomas.
Yeah, and we know we go back to around the deadline and the stars aren't in the lineups before the trades happen. Cam Thomas comes out and goes off for the big 40-plus point performances in 3 straight games. As Jacques Vaughn points out, they lost 2 out of 3 of those, though, so don't get over your skis about it. But we at the time thought, as the trades unfolded, well, okay, this now opens up the door for Cam Thomas over the back half of this season to really be able to, listen, we said then, 40-point performances? No, of course not. The volume wasn't going to be there. But certainly step into a more expanded role with this team and a more consistent role. Now, you can go and look at, I think if we look over his game logs here, we see, and I said this on the post game of the last episode there after the Hawks loss, that he is trending in the right direction. Plays 29 minutes, plays 30 against Chicago, and again, only go back to Miami where he's only playing 21. But if this last couple of games is the trend, then I think we're pushing in the direction of him getting a more significant role here. But as you said, 4 new players through the trades. There seems to be some uncertainty organizationally where they want to head here. But I do think, should Cam Thomas be starting? Should he be a key figure in the rest of this season? Does answer all of the other kind of questions that fall off of that. I mean, that makes sense, right? Like if Cam Thomas starts, then I think we maybe have a clearer sense of where they're trying to go.
Yeah, so let's not bury the lead. I think the way I kind of view this situation right now as it stands, Monday, February 27th, as we record this, and this comes from someone who is not really, just to reiterate this, because we'll reiterate things that when I think were incorrect, like I had been lower on Cam than I think a lot of other Nets fans over the last couple of years. I've come completely around on that, to the point where I actually think that going forward, he should probably be starting. Now we can talk about whether that's the starting means anything, if the minutes are going to be there or whatnot. But in terms of just like what his role should be, I think the team is actually constructed in a way that you might actually want to try to start maximizing his minutes to see if that what he can do particularly well can fit in with what these other guys do well. And I'm prepared for pushback on it, and I know that this is coming off a game where like I would probably slot him in over DFS, and like he was really good last game. So I totally get it. I'm not trying to pivot my thought there just based on one game, but it really speaks more like organizationally, like long term too. Like I do wonder about like what I do wonder if like that, like if there at some point should be like a show of confidence, or if that's what the Nets don't really want to do. Like it's very confusing thing. But let's just start there. Do you think there's a good case to have him just put him in the starting lineup just from a strictly a basketball? Like they're trying to win games now. I think there's a strong case to do it now, but I'm prepared to hear if you don't agree with that.
If you wanted to put him in the starting lineup, I wouldn't be blown away by it, shocked by it, or think, oh my God, you can't possibly. But with these last 2 games as the sample size, it's really like, to me, it's as long as he's getting minutes. That, like, to me, it's about he needs to be getting 25 plus minutes. I just said less than a week and a half ago, let's slot in Cam for 20, 25 minutes over these last couple of games. And even the ones against Chicago, I look at it and go, okay, it should be 25 to 30 and closer to 30 than 25. And it should continue to probably grow from there. So I maybe don't care that much about saying he needs to be in the starting lineup. Frankly, I can make the case that him being in the second unit can make a lot of sense for what he can do with depending on what the combination is. And we'll talk about some of the other rotation players here as well as we move through this. So
let me ask you a different question.
My short answer is no.
Okay, I'll phrase it a different way. Should he be lower than 6th man on this team? Like, should be like, okay, so if we look at last game, he entered.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
He's the first guy in off the rotation. So he is actually technically by that metric, the 6th man, right? Yeah. Like he was the first net sub. He came in with 7.5 minutes left to go in the first quarter. Like that is, he came in directly for Dorian Finney-Smith. Like that is a somewhat of a marked change from what we had seen before. So let's just remove. Let's maybe just remove starter from that piece and make it like, should he be in the top 6 of this rotation without a doubt going forward? That includes when Ben Simmons comes back. That includes like other scenarios here, right? Like, should he be no worse than 6? Because maybe that's the thing. Because like if we envision him as a 6-man sort of microwave off the bench scorer, which maybe he's best suited as, maybe that's where we kind of meet in the middle here. But like lower than that, we have to have real head scratching moments about what's going on with the team. Is that fair?
No, that's actually a really good, I think that's the better way to frame it, because yes, 100%, right? We talked about some of the things we were seeing from him and saying, this is what that role should be. Like even before, maybe like you said, I expanded my idea of what he can be in the long term, but in the short term, we always knew a microwave scorer can give you real offensive punch. Boom. He is the 6th player at worst that needs to be coming into the game here when we talk about rotations and just importance, and ultimately about having the balance for this team to be able to win basketball games, right? So yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you there. He's the first guy to be coming off the bench. And when he comes in off the bench, there should be a very specific mentality around this is now Cam Thomas time, right? This is where he can go and cook. And I will say, I'll tie it into where I think his maybe best value is right here, understanding we want to see him get more and significant minutes. I think that while we've seen his game continue to grow in other areas, which is important, we saw some nice driving kicks in this loss against Atlanta where he made the right basketball play. I highlighted that post game, got to the line 9 times again in just 29 minutes. That's something that he uniquely can do compared to, say, Spencer Dinwiddie, who played 41 minutes, only got to the line 4 times in that game. So there's some nice contrast there. But I do like the idea of, or I can surmise the idea of, Jacques Vaughn and the Nets don't think he's fully ready to be playing complementary team basketball 100% of the time. So in the second unit, as the first man off the bench, when he comes in, you can say, you can do your thing first. And I do wonder if they're trying to serve 2 agendas there, where they want to incrementally fold him in with these new players and not maybe over lean into what we're suggesting, right? Let the guy go cook. Who cares? Like let him get his buckets. And they're trying to maybe hedge their bets on that a little.
All right, we have some other things to talk about here for sure. Want to break down a few of Cam Thomas's just like regular stats, which I think are pretty intriguing. One really interesting one that I want to throw by you. And then some more advanced stats as well for Cam. Talk a little bit about the defense and where the overall team and the trajectory of the team is going forward. We'll talk about all of that in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar. Look, we've been telling you about Built Bar for a while because the Built Bar makes it easy. They want you to stay healthy. They want you to have a snack that you can go to that's going to fill you up, but they want to make sure it's absolutely healthy for you. It's giving you the protein you need and it has the flavors they're doing you a favor with the flavors to back it up. Churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut, almond. It's all there. Stats with it, 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar. You like to see that number low. Whopping 17 grams of protein. You don't need to wait around for a box either. You can get them at built.com, so no worries there. You can also just go to Walmart. You got a Sam's Club. If you have those places near you, the box stores, go and grab yourself the Built bars there as well. You grab a 13-bar box. Grab the brownie batter, the churro. You'll thank me later for all this. It's available wherever you want. You go to built.com to grab it. You go to Sam's Club, you go to Walmart as well. Go grab yourself a Built bar today.
Okay, so let's then just stick here on Cam Thomas for a minute, because we're going to talk about some comments from Cam Johnson and the defense and the cohesion and what they're trying to develop here, and why you're still trying to find the positives, which is what I tried to do that in the post-game podcast. At the top, I said that I was like, I'm going to go mostly positive because there's a lot of good things to take away. And then I went in on what's up with Seth Curry and what are we doing with Joe Harris and what are all these problems here. So I got derailed pretty quickly, but to stay on Cam Thomas, what are the stats telling us potentially about why he needs to have a more substantial role?
Well, it's funny because I think actually from a statistical standpoint on the offensive end, it actually was what makes some of this like even more confusing sometimes around what's happening with him. And, right before I get to it, I want to go back to something you said about Jacques Vaughn, where he mentioned, oh, yeah, we lost those games. They have sort of in a lot of ways gone out of their way to like not compliment him. I don't know if you've noticed that, but like there's been, there have been things like nice things said. There's been really no praise heaped here. If anything, it's been like side comments like this, like that you have to interpret like, hey, we lost the games, or, we got to see the professionalism, like all this stuff that we've seen sort of thrown out there. It's like, I don't know, passive aggressive at best and like sort of very obvious at worst that they just don't love what's happening here. Like, go ahead, because then I'll get into some of these stats.
And a good comparison, but there's other players on this roster. Joe Harris is still, they still speak about him glowingly for everything he brings and the intangibles, the effort, trying to get back from things. And that's to say nothing that these aren't remotely the similar situations, but just the idea of the honesty that they seem to be willing to provide around Cam Thomas and what they're wanting to see, needing to see, versus saying, hey, listen, we love Joe, but frankly, the game hasn't been there and we need to figure out something better, right? So there are very clear contrasts with the way they speak about other players on this roster. Cam Thomas seems to be uniquely isolated out until a slightly, far lesser extent because he's less important. I think Day'Ron is talked about in that same vein of a player that has a lot to prove and show, but Thomas has checked far more boxes already.
And look, Jacques Vaughn's been around a long time. He might see himself as like sort of a veterans coach at this point. I'm not really sure. Like some of these guys, just when there's job security or job preservation, you're going to play guys that you know what you're going to get out of, right? Like, so I totally get that. Let me throw some stats to you. So first of all, in places that we've seen that we've wanted Cam to improve over year, he's definitely just done that, right? Like he's shooting better from three this year. He's shooting 41% from three on 97 attempts. That's like borderline elite / maybe elite when it just comes to shooting. The catch and shoot 3-pointers are up to 45%, which is exactly what you needed to see. Like he needed to be able to take, just lock and fire when he has open looks. He was not doing that last year. He was succumbing to closeouts and he was not firing when he should have. And then with the times he was firing, they weren't going in. So it was like kind of worst of both worlds. He's completely flipped that around. Like he's shooting threes at an excellent clip and he's taking them, right? Yep. So it's actually happening. I want to give you another stat because I was looking, you mentioned the free throws and I was like, he is elite at getting to the line. I think I had not really realized just how elite he was at getting to the line. So listen to this. Since February 1st, which is where the minutes for him kind of start coming a bit online, right? Like this is when he plays the 24-minute game against Boston. He played 23 against the Lakers the game before, but it's just nice round number, right? February 1st, these are the leaders in free throw attempts per game in the NBA over seemingly the last month. Ready for this list? 1, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, superstar. Joel Embiid, superstar. Dame Lillard, superstar. Giannis, superstar. De'Aaron Fox, great, well, maybe superstar. Luka, 6, superstar. Ja Morant, 7, superstar. Trae Young, 8, call him a superstar. 9, Cam Thomas. Cam Thomas has the 9th most free throw attempts per game in the NBA since that day. And I'm using that day because that's when he actually started playing, right? Yeah. So, I think that's a fair. Now, is it buoyed a little bit from those high usage 40-point games? Dude, lots of people get to play minutes. That list is ridiculous. That's the best players in the league. like I just went like
the 20 attempt game against Phoenix is going to bump that up there 18 to 20 on that particular
of course those games are going to get it. Of course those games are going to help him. But the thing is, like, and actually what made me think of it is when you kind of just reminded me that, like, he got to the line 9 times yesterday in 29 minutes, like 9 times the game before in 30 minutes. Like, yeah, he has those high usage games. Here's the thing about these guys. Not many people are just even given the opportunity to be able to do this. Like, I could stick 90% of the NBA players out there for 40 minutes a game, and they wouldn't even come close to this number, right? Like, so yeah, he gets helped a little bit by those games in the middle, but not really.
Well, and again,
I think that's just such a good sign. That's such an interesting sign for me.
And this is again, you're saying since February 1st, right? Like this past month. But I mentioned that in the post game too. 18 attempts and 16 of 18 over the last 2 games and in over 30 minutes. Even if you go back into 2 games prior where he plays 20 and 21 minutes, he gets to the line 4 times in each of those games. Like, there's very clear patterns here. Even if you want to say, yeah, that those are inflated, those 3 games, the big performances. Okay, sure. But he essentially is a guy that if he's going to play around 30 minutes, you're going to be able to start to earmark him from 9 to 12 free throw attempts per game with consistency if you're going to be in that range. And I mean, that in and of itself and the company that you mentioned him being in makes him worthy of, again, don't care about starting, not starting. It just makes him deserving of getting more minutes because that, I said at the top, that's a unique skill set that he has on this roster that nobody else is capable of doing, even in the small sample size of a month, that Thomas has already shown that he can do. He has at least the strength. He has the body control. We talk all the time about how he can get himself into contorted, weird kind of angles and still get the shots off as well. So the and one opportunities are certainly there for him. That's where I think it's as important a factor as any reason to be playing him is late game sequences. You need somebody that can drive at the bucket and draw fouls, right? And the contrast, by the way, which I think we'll talk a little bit more here coming up in a second, the contrast between his style of attacking at the basket and Spencer Dinwiddie's are 2 very different things. The thing that we never forgot, but we're so excited to see again, was Spencer Dinwiddie getting after it with the refs when it comes to every single play, every single drive. And I think that what we've seen from Cam Thomas in the past month, combined with these early samples on Spencer Dinwiddie, are also a reason why the team, Jacques Vaughn, needs to figure out what the best version of this roster is and the best version of these rotations. I do find it interesting to think about what would these other units look like if it's DFS out and Cam Thomas in. How do you continue to find balance in scoring? I think there could be a very clear issue that they've run into predicated on getting Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith when they didn't know that Kevin Durant wasn't going to be here.
Yeah, I think this is probably playing some confusion with maybe what the overall plans were. I totally agree with you on Dinwiddie, by the way. I mean, like, it's funny too, because you mentioned it, like him arguing the one where he actually got the basket and got the tee. I mean, that's what they lost by, right? Like, and so look, it's every play matters, and you can. I'm just saying it contextually. I totally get what you're saying. I mean, every NBA player argues this stuff, right?
Yes.
But we've watched multiple seasons of Dinwiddie with the I'm doing it on YouTube with the hand up right here because he feels like he was fouled. And you're right, like their game is totally different when it comes to getting to the rim. And so when we get back here in a second, we'll talk about we'll try to get to the Cam Johnson soundbite. I also just want to talk about like what this means for the team really going forward, like what their goals should be going forward, because we said at the beginning, this Cam Thomas situation does sort of embody questions that we have about what just the plan is. Like, what is the overall plan with the Brooklyn Nets? We'll get to that in a second. First, going to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have the access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster, and you're going to love this, for free. You get on there, you add your purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile. It's going to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it super easy to find the candidates with just the right skills and experience. You can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. Look, I'm trying to hire someone for my wife's business right now. You have no idea. This is like, there's the sea of these people. It's just unbelievable. Like you're absolutely inundated. You have to find a way that you can narrow this down fast. LinkedIn Jobs helps you do it, helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. It's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Okay. So just the one other thing that I'll mention about Spencer Dinwiddie and his performance, we don't really have to go into, okay, did they plan to have him here or not? The issue I think that you're running into now when it comes to Cam Thomas is you want the veteran consistent play from Spencer Dinwiddie. And he has been as susceptible to falling into hero ball as Cam Thomas has been when he's out there on the court. You could argue maybe even more so in certain instances. Now, there's all the continuity and trying to get all these pieces to fit together, and I get that. But I think that the problem that maybe Jock Vaughn and the staff are running into is we already knew we don't have a lot of primary ball handlers. Doesn't look like Seth Curry is going to be one of those dudes for you down the stretch, right? So now you're talking about how do you set things up to put Cam Thomas in a position to be as successful as possible. And if you talk, there were times, by the way, in this Hawks game when he and Dinwiddie were on the court together and it worked. So I'm not saying that it can't, but I do think that there is that push and pull around being able to have consistent offensive sets and not finding yourself after 4 or 5 possessions going, boy, Cam Thomas ate up a bunch of the clock. Then Dinwiddie did, and back and forth they went, and we had a handful of chuck-ups here and a lot of broken possessions. I do think that is something that Jock Vaughn is trying to safeguard against while developing everybody else.
Yeah, you're totally right. And that probably in the end is actually the strongest case against it, right? Again, starting him and playing them side by side for long minutes is that stylistically, they are not matches. Neither is loving to assist tons of times a game. They both kind of want to get to the rim, even if they do it in different ways. They both have a step back in their game, but like all this is kind of stuff that happens when you're on ball a lot and can kind of just like work, explore the studio space on your own and then kind of like
you lay around the room,
Yeah, exactly. And like not have to worry too much about, what everyone else is doing. And
I want to be realist for a second. Remember the scene in Forrest Gump when he's kind of like listening to Elvis and he's just getting that vibe on as a little kid? Like that's just Dinwiddie feeling it out, getting the vibe on.
Yeah, like it's like we got 24 seconds to explore what can happen here, right? It's like, and so sometimes, and so I think, yeah, I'm glad you said that because I do think that's probably the biggest case against it, right? Is that like they're just not really they're not a match, and as long as both of them are on the team, it's really not probably going to work to pair them for like 20 minutes a game, right? You do want to start, you do want to stagger. Now it is interesting because the last 2 games where Cam was the first sub in off the bench, neither were for Dinwiddie. So they are playing them together, right? It was like the first time was for Cam Johnson in the game that got crushed. And then the last time we mentioned was for DFS. So he's coming in for the wings and they are trying it a little bit together. But yeah, I think I agree with you that in general, like their games don't really complement each other. And I'm not sure they ever will. And that's okay. Like that's not a knock really on either guy.
And now, so here, this, as you mentioned there, well, so what are they trying to accomplish here? Because I can make the case that we don't know, right? At this point, I'm up in the air. They lost by 44 points 2 games ago. So who knows which way is up when it comes to this team. And we won't get, I don't think we may not get to this Cam Johnson soundbite, but we will reference it here along the way because they're trying to find this continuity, trying to find consistency. But I can make the case that with all of the turnover and everything that you're trying to figure out, there's no guarantee that going veteran heavy and trying to safeguard against Cam Thomas or using too many minutes for Dorian Finney-Smith as a starter or otherwise, Royce O'Neal, etc., that it's going to guarantee that you secure the playoff spot, the play-in game, whatever it may look like. But what I can probably speculate more positively on is what you can learn about Cam Thomas over the remainder of the season if you continue to give him consistent minutes like this. Can Cam Thomas continue to evolve his game? Can Cam Thomas be someone that opposing defenses have to respect to the point where it affords Mikal Bridges some better matchups in a few instances, or Cam Johnson, or any of these guys? Like, I do think there is that world where you have to be willing to accept that the results of this season need not matter if you put the seeds in place of, okay, guys, we've really got something that we can build on here in the offseason. And once Jock Vaughn said, it's about 10-man down to 9, making the playoffs and going, that sends a very specific signal that may be hard to back away from. Because I don't know if results matter as much as it should be about confirming or denying the players you think you can go with beyond this season.
Yeah, and this is where it's a problem because it's like, what is the plan? Like this team can't win the championship. They obviously need other guys. At some point, they're going to need to upgrade again. We're stuck sort of they're not in the wilderness, thank goodness, but they are. And they were, it probably looked a little more bleak before, but like, they restocked the cabinets here a little bit and they have some assets and it's still, I think, a desirable destination despite how these last two guys left. But they do have to figure out sort of what they have too. And you do kind of have to know. And maybe what we're seeing with Cam here is this in the 6-man role, which maybe this is going to be very definitive. Maybe like a week from now, we're going to say, oh yeah, he's been 6-man here for 5 games now, and this is kind of it. And it's sort of
nobody else to go to.
Well, and what it is it's we're not just tossing the keys across the table and say, hey, gas it, gun it to 80, kid, and see what you got. But it's like it's a little bit of hey, you're allowed to take it a spin around the block here a little bit, but it's not going to be to start the game, and it's not going to be for the first 7 minutes. That's when we're going to play sort of a different brand of basketball. So you don't just get to just take the car out and it's no curfew, but at some point you're going to, it's more measured, but when you're in there, you are still given the latitude to kind of play your game. And I wonder if that's actually just what we're seeing here.
And I think, it's funny because I had said going back about, well, yeah, you play him kind of in that Kyrie role that he was having off of Kevin Durant. Hey, to close out the first half, hey, this is my time to go, right? Give me those back 5 minutes in the third quarter, et cetera. And you build out to 20. I just undersold it. It should be 7 in each of those instances. It should be coming in midway through the quarter. Should be the first man off the bench and then allow him to go ahead and do it. You said it. Little joyride. Do some donuts for yourself, but do it in spots where it makes sense. And by the way, go back and look at this Hawks game. If you think about the way the game started and the way it finished, the Nets gave up 37 points in that first quarter, and it was all predicated on the defense was sagging back into the paint, weren't closing out their perimeter shooters. They couldn't hit the broadside of a barn from deep themselves. But then over the next 3 quarters, all of the defensive things were there in big chunks. So this comes down to, and actually, if you don't mind, I will play. Let's close out this with this clip from Cam Johnson, who discusses what is trying to happen on the defensive end and what they want to do here, which I maybe contextualizes not only the upside here, but also why Cam Thomas just needs to slowly wait his turn until he can be cooking while everyone else locks down the defense.
I think it's the defensive end. Defense in the NBA is a lot of ways to do it, and it's all kind of on principles, principles. And not to make any excuses, right? But for 4 years, I've had a coaching staff who was very adamant on certain principles, and it was on us to execute them at a high level. And after day after day after day of working on them, they get a little ingrained in your head, right? So some of the principles we have here in Brooklyn are almost complete opposite. So it's a lot of it, it is largely the same. Defense is defense. You got to stop the other team. But once we kind of iron out those instances where, you're reacting a quarter of a second later, I think our defense will be a lot sharper once that.
I'm going to cut it off there because he goes on to say he himself over the first few games in Brooklyn knows that he was late, that he didn't have the right assignment because he's trying to retrain himself on this. And if you think about Cam Thomas not being a defensive first guy, this actually piece kind of matters. And this may be the first step of what Jacque Vaughn is trying to accomplish. Let's get everybody locked into the system here. And then once those things are happening fluidly, all of a sudden Cam Thomas does get to have more free range because the guys around him can handle the heavy lift. There's a lot of communication. There's a lot of scheme that needs to be ironed out here. We're only 5 games in to this new look of this team.
I was on mute there. Yeah, it makes total sense. And it makes total sense. And he's, making distinction between probably what, drop coverage and what they're playing with Ayton and Biyombo and all these other guys into like a full switch everything scheme. And like, obviously there's going to be hurdles, but if it's also being hammered home as a core tenet of what you're trying to do, and that Cam is maybe sort of deficient on that end, or maybe lackadaisical or just doesn't know or whatever it is and can't do it, then yeah, it's going to overshadow some part of the piece where the scoring is like borderline elite, right? Because it is half the game. And if you view it as half the game and he's not adhering to those principles correctly, then yeah, but I'm with you too, because at some point though, they are in a situation where it's like, I mean, who else is coming as the 6th man here? Like it's so obvious. He's played himself into like such an obvious territory that's where it's like, well, what are we going to do? We can't bury this guy.
And everybody else has played themselves out of any role that they thought they were going to have.
Completely. Completely. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I just was agreeing with that. I said completely.
No, the old like, Jacques Vaughn, 10 guys down to 9. 9 guys? You got 9 guys you think are viable candidates to be a part of your playoff rotation? Like, we got to knock off the cobwebs here, friends. We're hoping to get to 7 if we're lucky with Cam Thomas and Royce O'Neal. Like, that's the rotation right now, and you're hoping that someone else can show something. And in that vein, maybe you just got to unlock this kid and hope that he can be a spark plug for you if you want to have success down the stretch.
All right, we're going to get out of here. We will be in, or I'll be in, post-game following Tuesday night's game. So come check it out over on YouTube. Let's get those numbers. Look, no KD, no Kyrie, no problem. Those YouTube numbers are still climbing, baby. Really appreciate everyone that's jumped in there, friends over at YouTube. Come join us live after games. Come hang out, answering questions, doing everything over there. So make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over at YouTube.
Whatever the Brooklyn Nets might be holding against Cam Thomas, at some point you just got to think, my mama always said, you got to put the past behind you before you can move on. Forrest Gump.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. Probably RIP at this point. We will be back again. Not the guy who played him, though. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.